welcome. My name is Neil Seidman, and I'm the co-chairman of the Public Education Committee for ADAA. That's the Anxiety and Depression Association of America. And we're really happy to present this webinar. The title is, I am stressed, worried, and have no confidence. What can I do? And our presenter is Dr. John Walker. And we're going to be recording the webinar, so you'll be able to see it again a little bit later on the ADAA website. Now, during the webinar, you can type in questions. And if you look on the right side of your screen, you should see a Q&A panel. And there's a little field at the bottom of that panel. And when you click inside that little field, you can type in your question. Then hit either your enter key or click the icon. And we'd like to make this webinar interactive, so please feel free to type in your questions right during the presentation is just fine. And keep in mind, other participants in the webinar cannot see your question. Only myself and Dr. Walker can see your question. Okay, now before we begin, I'd like to say just a little about ADAA, which is the Anxiety and Depression Association of America. ADAA was started back in 1979, and today it's the leading nonprofit organization in the field of anxiety disorders and depression. And our mission is to improve diagnosis and to promote the prevention, treatment, and cure of anxiety, depression, and stress-related disorders through education, practice, and research. And we work to end stigma and to get the word out that these conditions are real, serious, and treatable. And I want to invite you to visit the ADAA website. It's really a wonderful resource. It's adaa.org. And on the website, some of the things you'll find, there's a great section called Find a Therapist. Also, there's lots of free educational information and resources, self-tests, information on self-help groups, clinical trials that might be going on in your area, and just a lot of wonderful information. So it's really worth visiting the website. And you can support ADAA by making a charitable donation on the website. Okay, so I'm really happy to introduce our presenter. Dr. Walker is a clinical psychologist and the director of the Anxiety Disorders Program at St. Boniface General Hospital in Winnipeg, Canada. And he's a professor in the Department of Clinical Health Psychology at the University of Manitoba. And in addition to his teaching and research activities, he's the co-author of 2 books, Triumph Over Shyness, Conquering Social Anxiety Disorder, and that book is published by ADAA, and Treating Health Anxiety and Fear of Death. Dr. Walker was a founding member of the boards of the Anxiety Disorders Association of Manitoba and the Anxiety Disorders Association of Canada. And on the ADAA website, you can hear Dr. Walker's podcast entitled Social Anxiety Disorder, What You Need to Know. Okay, so let me turn it over now to Dr. John Walker.
Thanks very much, Neil. I really appreciate the introduction. I'm really looking forward today to speaking with people about this topic of I'm stressed, worried, and have no confidence. And also looking forward to hearing questions from people that we'll repeat and address as we go through the association. I wanted to thank ADA for asking me and for hosting the get-together. And I also, I'm just going to go to the right slide here. I want to thank Sally Winston, and who's worked with ADAA for many years, and also to Jean Tycrow and Neil for organizing this evening. I wanted to tell you a little bit about myself. I'm a psychologist with more than 30 years experience working with adults, families, and children. In fact, I just shifted my practice now more to especially working with children and parents, but I continue to work with adults. I'm also a parent of 2 children, a boy and a girl, who are young adults. And I have 3 sisters and 1 brother and 8 nephews and nieces. So that's a pretty active family when we get together. I mention that because the family is one of the contexts that we get support in for dealing with stressors, but also it's one of the things we have to deal with. So looking at my family, there have been times when I've been called upon to help out with stressors that are affecting the whole family. In my work, I'm very privileged to work with people with all kinds of stresses, from minor ones that come up in everyday life to very severe stresses such as chronic or terminal illness, a child with a disability, a death in the family, and post-traumatic stress disorder. So it's a real range. And I find work in this area very exciting because you get to meet so many interesting people. Just to tell you a little bit about Winnipeg, where I'm from, I'll say actually that I've been involved with ADAA for many years, and it's actually a very international organization, even though it's based in the U.S. So when I go to the annual meetings they have, I've met people there from Norway, Argentina, Japan, Israel, Iran, right from around the world, but it has a very strong base in the U.S. I live about 500 miles north of Minneapolis. For those of you who might know North Dakota, we're about 150 miles north of Grand Forks, North Dakota. One of the stressors we deal with here is a cold and long winter. It's a beautiful day today. There's about 2 feet of snow outside, and the snow comes in November and leaves us in March. So you have to adapt your life to that. For all of you around the group tonight, one of the stresses or stressors in your life is dealing with the environment that you live in and your community. And that's something we can think about in terms of managing stress. A number of objectives we want to cover today. We'll say a little bit about what is stress. We'll talk about the link between stress and health. And there's also a link between stress and problems with anxiety and depression. We'll touch on some of the ways of coping with stress, both effective and ineffective. And we hope to finish off with talking about planning ahead to deal with the negative impact of stress. I realize that our time is fairly short, so we may not get to every one of these points. At the end of the presentation, I'll put up a couple of books where you can delve a lot more into the issue of stress management. And there's very many good resources out there. First of all, to talk about some terms, the term stress is used in many ways, and that can be a little bit confusing to people. One of the ways I find it's helpful to use language here is to talk about stressors as the external challenges we face every day in living our life. Stress is actually our body's response in dealing with these stressors, and there are things like physical reactions, emotions. Many people are familiar with muscle tension as a response to stress. A very important part of how we deal with stress is appraisal. So our judgment about our ability to handle these stressors, and our appraisal relates to how we think about ourselves and the challenges we face. And finally, coping involves the different ways we can respond to stressors. There isn't one right way of coping with challenges in life. There's many ways to cope, and that's sort of encouraging. And I'm hoping as we have this discussion tonight and as people send some questions in, that you'll be able to think about how you cope with stress and how effective those techniques are, and about new things you'd like to learn about coping with stress. Looking at stressors, the external environment, there's a number of different types. Uh, uh, Chronic stressors often relate to a person's role in the family, but they also relate to your work life. There's also stressors like major life events, sudden illness, death in the family, accident, a severe weather event, I think, which they're having out in the Washington area today. And then there's daily hassles, things like parking tickets, having an argument at work or at home, losing something important, a travel delay. So stress is a normal part of life, and I'll see what I've got on the next slide here. So stressors are a normal part of life. Probably the most important ones are chronic stressors, and these tend to be in our lives for a long time. Very often they relate to our family and our relationships. So having a family member with a disability or some kind of problem in coping with life can be a stress. We can have challenges in relationships with our partner or significant others in our lives. Another common source of stress I hear about is problems at work. And finally, all of us have probably heard about challenges that people face with their finances and the major challenges they get into there. As we go through this, I'll talk a little bit about some of the people I've seen, and I've changed the name and details on this person. It's Maria, but it gives you an idea of the kind of situation that a psychologist might be faced with. Maria is a 56-year-old woman. She has 2 grown children. She's an office worker, and she's seen in her environment as a very effective and good worker. She's well-liked and does a good job. Maria's had a lifelong problem with very low confidence, and she's very concerned about what others think about her. She's often sort of preoccupied by that. Maria's husband is 4 years older. He's retired and has a good pension. In her life, her husband was really a source of strength and a source of support. So where she lacked confidence, he would really shore her up and provide lots of support and encouragement. Very unfortunately, her husband had a serious health problem in the last year or two, and now he's left with reduced ability to problem solve and even reduced ability to think and concentrate. He's quite lethargic, worries and complains a lot, is less emotionally supportive and more dependent. And so right now, unfortunately for Maria, her husband has gone from a real source of strength in her life to a real source of stress, and this has been a big demand for her. I'm going to ask people around the table now, I see we've got a good group attending the meeting, to take a minute to think about and even jot down one or two of the major stressors in your life right now. And you might think in those categories. Have there been some major life events recently that are causing stress for you, that are ongoing stressors? Are there some chronic stressors, things in your family, your work, or your health? And for some people, it's just an endless list of daily hassles that sort of weigh them down. So you've got that window for questions and answers. So if I'm just going to be quiet for a minute now, and I'll take a breather, and I'd like to encourage as many people as possible just to jot down what you think some of your major stressors are at this point.
Yeah, everyone, so feel free to just type some of those in that little Q&A box at the bottom. And only John and I can see what you type in. It'll just give us an idea of some of the kinds of stresses that come to mind as you listen to John. Here's a good one. Time with extended family. That can be an ongoing, I like that term, chronic stress, John. So that means that when you say chronic stress, you're talking about the kind of stress that just goes on over a long period of time.
They hang in there. So I see one of the comments up there is time with extended family. So I see people in a similar situation who have very harmonious and good relations with the family, but then getting into the extended family, there's often more troubles out there, more people that are leaning on you, those sort of things. I'll just repeat some of them are coming up on the screen now, just to show you the variety of things that people are thinking about. We've got someone that mentioned chronic illness of a coworker. Another person mentioned my sister committed suicide less than a year ago, just before my birthday. That's a very sad situation. Finances, work responsibility, the responsibility of being a parent and a breadwinner, trying to find balance in life. This is a big one for a lot of people nowadays, sandwiched between my daughter going to college and my mother beginning to have significant health problems. So this is the sandwich generation. Lack of respect for work, unemployment and depression. And unemployment is a major stressor for people, and depression is a frequent outcome of unemployment. Divorce and trying to co-parent under challenging circumstances. Death of both parents in the last couple of years. So what we can see here, I'm just looking at the events, the different kinds of events. Many of them are family-related ones. That's really striking. People who are struggling in life, often with health problems or mental health problems that you have some responsibility for. So I'm going to move on to the next slide now and just show you. In some of the work we do, I'm also a researcher, and we looked at what are some of the stressors that other people describe. So we asked people with a chronic health problem called inflammatory bowel disease, also known as Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis, about the stressors in their life. And we contrasted people who were having active symptoms and those who weren't having active symptoms. And this tells us something about the stressors that most people have. And if you look at the sources of stress, we've listed them with the most common early in the list and then dropping off as you go down the list. And what you can see, if you look in the left-hand column of inactive disease, these are people that are not feeling sick right now. They're functioning every day, probably like the average person in the community. 10% of people are having stress because of family situations, 10% work or school, 5% finances, 10% because of health problems, 5% because of conflict. And conflict, when it is there, is often a major stress for people. It's challenging to learn to deal with conflict. About 5% a death, like a death in the family or someone at risk of death. You can see there's a big, big range that correspond pretty much with what we're hearing now from people that are making comments about the stressors they face. So basically, I'll go back to that slide. The other thing I want you to look at on this one is if you contrast people with active disease and inactive disease, look at how much higher and how much more stressors people with the active disease are.
It looks like more than double.
More than double, that's right, Neil. So basically, if you're loaded down with one stress, you've got an active illness, then when you look at your life, all the other stresses look more important. Stressors, I should say. So it's bang on, Neil. It's twice as much. So in looking at our list there, the one I have highlighted right now is death of both parents in the last couple of years. So if you're struggling with the death of one parent, then dealing with the death of another one is really challenging. I've got another one here from someone in the group, divorce and trying to co-parent under challenging circumstances. So when people have a divorce, often they're left with their parenting responsibilities and more chauffeuring. They're left with trying to agree with their former partner about how to bring up the kids. Often after a separation or divorce, there's major financial stress too. So stresses tend to come in packs, and that makes it really challenging for people.
So here's a question, John, about that slide.
Yeah.
Is the illness a result of the stress?
Boy, what a good question. So we've been doing research on this particular condition, which is kind of a chronic health problem, and it relates to the functioning of the immune system. And it turns out, first of all, that being ill is a big life stress. So with any of us around the table, when you have a illness, even a bad flu, it's a big life stress. When you have a chronic illness, much more so. But the other interesting thing that relates to Neil's comments is that when you're feeling quite well and healthy, stress affects your risk for having health problems. So chronic stress can have an impact on your immune system, can leave you more vulnerable to coughs and colds, but it also, chronic stress relates to a whole range of different health problems. Do you think I hit the answer there, Neil?
Yeah, and then another one of our audience wanted us to clarify, can you go back to that slide again?
Sure thing.
That, and make sure, let me see if I understand it. So the active disease, if people are having the symptoms of the irritable bowel syndrome.
Yeah, the inflammatory bowel disease.
Yeah, inflammatory bowel disease.
Yeah, and it's like, for other people to know, often when people have a chronic health problem, at times it's quiet and at times it's really acting up.
I see. So that's inactive means that they might get a recurrence of it, but they're not having
exactly
symptoms.
Exactly. So where stress and where we're researching and where we're finding this is true is that those people with the inactive disease, the ones with higher levels of stress, are more likely for their disease to switch over to active.
So let me see if I'm hearing this right. What I'm hearing, John, is that if I have a disease that's giving me symptoms,
yep,
then things that come up in my life, I'm going to experience them as more stressful.
That's right.
And
exactly.
Then on the other hand, if I have stresses in my life that maybe I'm having difficulty coping with, that can increase my symptoms of whatever the physical condition might be.
Exactly.
So it works both ways. It's like a vicious circle.
That's right. It works in both directions. And the hopeful thing is that when your coping gets stronger, you decrease the chance of having disease problems and so on. So there's a big payoff for people in learning how to feel confident about their coping and being very flexible in how they cope with stressors.
So being better, if I learn to be better at coping with my stress, that is going to improve whatever the physical condition might be.
Exactly. Exactly. You're right on. Okay, I'm going to skip ahead a bit here now. So we talked about the take-home message, and Neil really hit it on the head there. Now, the next issue is about appraisal. So what appraisal is all about is that really relates to the confidence part of your title. This relates to your judgment about your ability to manage a stressor. So if you say things to yourself like, I can handle this and I can cope, and if that's your way of understanding yourself, that appraisal means that the stress won't be the stressor won't be as hard on you. If your response to a stressor is to say, this is going to ruin my day, if you're having hassle, this will make me sick, I can't stand this, I can't go on one more day, that appraisal of yourself as not being able to cope too well will make it harder. So one of the things we really work with people is their own understanding of their coping ability and see if we can strengthen that. And in some of the stress management work and the books that we'll talk about at the end, that's really something. And it relates to positive and negative thinking.
So when you say appraisal, is that the same thing as what am I telling myself about my stress?
Exactly, your self-talk about it. And your self-talk about your ability to cope. So many of these stresses are very sad and tough. So losing a parent, which we had a number of people there, or losing a sibling, is very, very tough thing to go through. But if you see yourself as able to handle it, you'll get through it better. If you say, I can't stand this, I can't cope, I can't I can't handle this in any way, that'll make it harder for you to deal with it. So the next part of the equation, well, I'll just say that appraisal may relate to your usual thinking style, whether you're more on the confidence side or lacking in confidence, whether you usually take an optimistic or a pessimistic view. And a lot of people with negative thinking patterns have trouble with catastrophizing, is seeing something as a big catastrophe when that doesn't help them cope so much. So I'll just ask you to think about that a little bit. Do you see yourself in dealing with challenges as being confident or lacking in confidence, optimistic, pessimistic? And do you have a I can deal with this approach? So that's something we encourage people to work towards, is I can deal with this challenge. It's hard, it's sad, it's hard to deal with, but I can deal with it. And that's what stress management is really all about. So let's talk about coping a bit. We learn a lot about coping when we're growing up in our family. I've got this little story in my life here. Dad, you want to come out and look at the car? I was sitting at home one time when I was about 17 or 18, and my sister, who was a year younger, came in and said about 10 at night, Dad, do you want to come out and look at the car for a minute? And we all knew that that was a signal for there's a big dent there to look at, and you're going to have to pay for it. And my father was quite a character. He had his strengths and weaknesses, but he had this way of responding to stressors, and basically said, you know, I'll look at it tomorrow. It'll be okay. I'm just relaxing here. It's the evening. I'm going to take it easy. I'll get up when I get up in the morning. I'll go take a look at it, and we'll talk about it then. So he had this wonderful way of managing stress by not rushing it, taking time to think it over, not catastrophizing. You know, money was tight when we were growing up, and it wasn't easy for him to pay for things, but he just knew that jumping up and down and getting excited and making my sister more upset wasn't going to help with the situation. So I learned some valuable lessons that way. Each of you in the group tonight might just think about what lessons did you learn in your family about coping. Sometimes we, from our family, we get both really good lessons and then some problematic lessons. So I'm going to go on to coping now. So people often have typical ways of coping. Different stressors call for different coping. Many stressors you can't directly influence, but you can strengthen your coping responses. So most of the stressors that we had down from our early list there were stressors that laid outside of yourself, you know, a parent dying or a sibling dying, or those are things we can't control, but we can control our coping response. And also, the good news is here, you can plan ahead to be prepared to cope in the future. Well, what about healthy coping? If you thought a minute ago about what some of your coping mechanisms are, problem solving is, you know, very down-to-earth coping strategy, but it's neglected and underrated. And some of the people that look at how people handle things realize that most of us are problem solving in everyday life is kind of rusty, and we're not always as systematic with that as we could be. So problem solving is a really important one that we'll probably spend a few more minutes on. Engaging support from the people around you is really important. So keeping in touch with your friends, keeping in touch with your family. One of the tendencies people have is when a rough event happens, like a death in the family, some people have a real natural tendency to withdraw from friends and family, and that can be very problematic. So learning, even when you're hurting, to keep connecting with your friends and family, to keep being involved with activities can really help you get through a tough situation. We'll talk a little bit later on about accepting your emotional response. So there's a very strong indication we're getting that acceptance is a big part of coping with problems. Managing the intensity of your emotional response, and lastly, taking good care of yourself. So all of those are examples of healthy coping. They're quite different from each other, but they all really have tremendous advantages in dealing with stress.
We have a question about, because you made a really good point about how very often when there's a big stress that we just automatically withdraw from other people when that's the very moment when we need support from others. And one of our participants typed in, what if I just don't have that support? What if there just aren't people in my life that are available to give me support?
Yeah, and I see there's a follow-up comment of I have trust issues, so that's a big factor. This is a time, this is a very good question and comment about what if connecting with others isn't an option. First of all, people get a lot of support from their natural environment. Most people, friends, family members, and so on. But many people find themselves at a time in life where those supports just don't seem to be there. And if they've struggled with trust, they may not feel comfortable with people that are close. That's a time where I'd often encourage people to reach out to someone that's in a helping profession and connect with that person. If you recognize that you have trust issues, that may be part of the conversation about issues about trust. It's something that you really have to work through. So that
Can I share something just for a moment?
Oh, sure.
Just
Please.
very briefly, that was a big issue that I personally got help from seeing a therapist.
Yep.
Which I don't know that I would have learned it another way. That being in that, having that special experience of working one-on-one with a good therapist was able to introduce me to how do I trust other people.
Absolutely. Boy, that is so key. And in the prevention part, one of the ways of kind of preparing yourself for future stressors is to really work on that part of your life, your relationships, having healthy relationships, not too many conflicted relationships, and figuring out who you can trust and how to trust people and how to go about pulling that into your life. I want to say a little bit about not so healthy coping. So most of us have seen examples of this. Most of us may have seen examples in our own life. Avoidance, high levels of emotional response, and things like people getting angry, irritable, complaining to other people, rage, all those things. Another one that's not so healthy sometimes is impulsive responding. So figuring that you have to do something about it right away to solve it. I saw someone early in the session had made a comment about extended family extended family being a stressor, and sometimes trying to solve something in the extended family with just a quick confrontation or argument or whatever, when it's done impulsively without thinking it through, can create more problems. So being too impulsive can be a problem. Some people respond to stressors with just excessive worrying and rumination. They just think about the problem over and over and over again, and they don't get to any kind of solutions. And the last point here, we've all run into people, and some of us dealt with this ourselves, is using alcohol or street drugs as a way of coping, and that really gets in the way for some people. So again, you might want to just reflect for a second about what are some ways of coping that you've used that are really effective. What are some unhealthy ways of coping that you need to recognize in yourself and manage so that you don't run into problems with them? So I think I've hit on this one already. Stress is a normal part of life. You can't have life without stressors. And actually having too few stressors or challenges may result in not living up to your potential. So stressors can help us grow. You can trust your body, and your body's built with ways of reacting to stressors that help you survive. So we're built to be able to handle even very difficult stressors. I've noticed this in children that I see. So children that I see sometimes deal with serious illness, with the death of a parent, with parental separation, and it's challenging for them, but it's amazing to see their resilience in coping with that. And so lastly, excessive stressors or poor coping has negative effects on your health, your well-being, your happiness, and it's really worth paying attention to how you are coping with stress. There's some very interesting studies recently that looked at perceived stress in Americans. There's been a lot of changes in the last 25 years in our world, but not much change in how people see stress and report it. Tends to be higher in women, partly because of their family responsibilities and their involvement with the extended family. The good news is it tends to get lower as you get older, and it's lowest in retired people. As with many other challenges in life, it's harder to deal with if you have a low income, and harder to deal with it if you have a situation where you have less education. And I see a comment about someone in our group who sees a good therapist, but has the habit of avoiding anxiety-producing activities. I keep to myself and prefer to be in my home where things are controlled and safe for me. So actually, this is a very common way of coping. People devote themselves to minimizing stress. The challenge there is that stress will always come, so there's a big advantage to getting used to handling it when it's at a moderate level, and then when very strong stresses come, you're more prepared to deal with them.
Can I make a comment or ask
Please,
a question here? So what I'm hearing is that maybe what's going to move me forward in that kind of a situation, instead of trying to avoid stresses, to see what I can do to strengthen my ability to cope with stress.
Exactly. So the last point on the slide up now is that two people may have very similar stressors, but one will experience that as a very high level of stress and another person as more of a normal level of stress. So there's big differences between people, partly based on how they appraise things, how they see themselves as being able to cope, and also how the coping strategies they put into place when they're facing a stress. I think we talked about illness, so I'll get through that one quickly. I want you to think, everyone, look upstream a little bit, and with the Anxiety and Depression Association, people are interested who've experienced anxiety or depression. What are the risk factors for anxiety and depression problems anyway? Well, there's genetic factors that have been very well documented now, but they account for only some of the problem. Other big factors are what's called childhood adversity or early stress in life, stressful experiences close to the time where you start to experience depression or anxiety, chronic stress. And so even when you've had trouble in your life with depression or anxiety, learning effective coping strategies reduces the chance that you'll struggle with anxiety or depression in the future. So again, investing in yourself and learning good coping strategies can really, really help. I've seen the people that come through my door that relationships are a big source of stress. Conflict in relationship with family and friends and even in the workplace is really associated with high stress. And positive relationships help in coping with stress. So investing in positive relationships and learning to deal with difficult and challenging people in your life without excessive conflict can really help you to get through stress. One form of therapy that has attracted a lot of interest recently, it's a kind of cognitive behavior therapy, and it has a couple of ideas I'll touch on this evening that I think are very helpful in coping with stress. And even if you're not involved in this kind of treatment, you can learn from some of these ideas about how to strengthen your own response to stress. The commitment part of acceptance commitment therapy is to really focus on your values and your goals. And this helps give you life direction. So when you're dealing with the stress of a work stress, a family stress, an illness in the family, a difficult person in your life, keeping your eye on your values and your goals will really help you to cope. It's like a compass that keeps you on track and direction. Values are things that describe the ways of thinking and behaving that guide our life. Okay, all of us have values. Sometimes you have to think about them and clarify them, but most of us have values about family, friendships, work, health, finances in the community, environment, spirituality. And it's actually a good idea to really think about these at times and write down some of the things that are important to you. Here's some values I hear from people in my office. I hear them, but I also see them in how they're living their lives. Kindness to others, loyalty to friends and family, even when they're struggling. Most people put a high value on being effective in their work, taking good care of your health. And these are common ones I hear, but each of us has different values and ones in addition to this. And really knowing those will help you to stay on track and deal with stress. Goals are related to values, but they're often shorter-term targets that put values into actions. So it's good to think about the short, medium, and long-term goals in your life and how they relate to each other. So someone who's working on stress management may have a goal of a more effective way to handle a family member. Another person might have a goal of developing and following a financial plan. So those are goals that really can help us along. I guess the next thing, what about the acceptance part? So acceptance, it turns out, is very, very important in dealing with challenges in life. First of all, acceptance of your own experiences, your own thoughts, emotions, pain. A big one there is the second one I have on the list, acceptance of other people the way they are, and the acceptance of the world the way it is. Sometimes when I talk to people about acceptance, they say accepting something is agreeing with it or liking it or wanting it, and it's not the same at all. It doesn't mean that we agree with things. It means we know what's there, we see it's out there, and we realize it's hard to change. So acceptance does not mean that things cannot change, but acknowledges this is where things are at now, and it takes time and effort for there to be change. Accepting your thoughts and feelings. So our thoughts and feelings change from minute to minute throughout the day. They're sort of like the weather. That's a really good analogy. And when any of us are in a thunderstorm and you look out at the sky when you go outdoors, it feels like the world's going to end. There's lightning, there's thunder, the sky's black, the trees are swirling around. 1 hour later, the weather may be calm and peaceful. And that's how our feelings work too, that we may be faced with a challenge or a stress or whatever, and we have very, very strong emotions, and they're very genuine and very true emotions, but they won't be there forever. They'll be changing. And accepting our emotions, not struggling to change them, just accepting them how they are, and not fighting with them can help us to find ways of coping with stress. In some of the approaches that are helpful, such as acceptance and mindfulness, learning to observe your thoughts and feelings and to see them as changing and to understand them, to put them in perspective, can really, really help you. And recognizing that thoughts and feelings or experiences are not the same as reality. And this is a really big one. When people come into my office that are dealing with major stressors, very often they say that for me to be happy, I must change this person. And often it's a family member or a partner. What I tell people is it's very challenging to change anyone, including yourself actually, but the least difficult person in the world to change is yourself. So often when we ourselves change, other people around us change, sometimes quickly, but more often gradually. So when someone's working on stress management, they may see another person in their life as a problem, and that person has to change. It's important to accept that they may not change, and the thing that you have the most power to influence is how you respond to that person, how you problem solve in dealing with them. examples. So let's get back to Maria, who I talked about, who was 56, and unfortunately for her, her husband had really had this dramatic change where he went from being a big supporter to someone that was very dependent on her, and so on. And she was pining for him to be back the way he was, and always hoping that he would be. And it was good for him to her to hope. But after a couple years, it was clear with the problem that he had that he wasn't going to change back. And so then she had to accommodate her life to that. And by changing herself, actually, she helped both her and him to cope. So he had always been in charge in the past of vacations and spending money and house improvements. And he was so worried about money, he couldn't spend money. So she took charge. She was assertive, and she had quite a bit lower income than him, and she spent her income on arranging family trips and house improvements. And they had always shared the resources anyway, but she didn't leave herself always waiting for him to agree to a change. And he ended up having they ended up having wonderful vacations. She started to develop more confidence because she had to be more assertive. And so by her accepting her husband the way he was and in his changed state, it really helped her to cope.
John, we have a question that came in about medication.
Yeah.
Can medicate? So you had in an earlier slide.
Yep.
Saying that I think street drugs and alcohol can, for a lot of people, be an unhealthy way of trying to cope with stress. Can medication that I'm prescribed for anxiety or depression, can that be a resource for my coping with stress?
Boy, that's a great question, and absolutely, medication is a very helpful resource for a lot of people. There's a lot of research that really both therapy and medication help people with problems with anxiety. You actually don't have to do both at once. In our programs, what we do is we encourage people to learn about each approach to treatment, and usually what we do is encourage them to do one thing at a time. So decide which treatment you prefer the most. Do that first, see how it goes. If it doesn't take you far enough, then you can add the other one in. So there's big advantages to informing yourself about all the treatment options if you're dealing with problems with anxiety or depression, which really add to people's sense of stress. Great question, that one. So just glancing quickly at the problem solving, one of the challenges that people face in problem solving is that second point there. They face problems, but they don't consider alternative strategies. And so really thinking through the alternative strategies that they can take in the situation and asking the question how they'd work. So when people are behaving impulsively, they get an idea in their head, I really need to confront this person, I need to tell them how badly they've been behaving, and so on. They don't think about, well, how well has this worked with this person in the past? How likely is it to work? And so this whole idea of defining a problem, it's good to put it on paper. It's good to write down your alternatives, thinking through and making notes about how the alternatives might work, and then trying out one of those alternatives and taking time to make sure you see if it works, that kind of thing. I'm going to go on to the next slide. So problem solving just applies in many different situations. I want to quickly touch on some of the other approaches to stress management, and then we're going to get back and really invite more questions. I see one question up on the board. We're going to invite more. So number one, learning to respond in a cooler way to stressors. Most stressors are actually not emergencies. There are some emergencies around, but most of them aren't. They've been there for a long time. They'll be there in the future. And so it really pays to take time to think through the options and to problem solve. Look for patterns over time. So how do I behave in this situation? How does the other person behave? Can I look at that situation and can I try some different approach to it, which includes staying cool? Mindfulness. A lot of people in the community have heard about mindfulness. Some of people may have gone to courses or taken a treatment involving mindfulness. This is a very powerful approach. I found in my own life this has made a real difference in terms of learning to be more focused and more aware on the present moment, being aware of your emotions, thoughts, and actions. Really pay attention to the world around you in the present and not getting too sidetracked with feeling badly about the past or worried about the future, but dealing with this present moment. There's some very helpful meditation techniques that are used within mindfulness, and one of the techniques, breathing meditation, is very straightforward to learn and very similar to some other relaxation strategies.
John, is mindfulness connected with what you were talking about earlier about acceptance?
Exactly. So a big part of mindfulness involves in awareness of what's going on in our life and the world around us, and not judging it, just having awareness of it. So mindfulness and acceptance go very, very closely together. They're both things that are learned through practice, and really worth considering taking a course if you are interested in learning more about that. It's a technique that many people recommend. Other things, getting support from people around you, so including both family and friend support, but if you find that's thin at the current time, really looking at support from professionals, helpers, clergy, people that have a good track record at helping other people. Mutual support from things like other people who've been through a similar situation can be very helpful. Getting information is a very good source of support. Taking care of your health, physical exercise, time for rest and relaxation, and super important to have some time for fun in life. We're just about to throw things over to questions. So learning effective problem solving, trying not to arrange your life so you're going at 110% all the time. Invest in good relationships and having a financial cushion. Those are all important parts. I'll maybe finish off we got a couple questions up on the board. Okay, got a couple of questions here. Just a second here. There's one question about what about the rationale for taking one treatment at a time? First of all, this is what we recommend to people, but some people prefer not to do it that way. They prefer to try 2 or 3 treatments at once. The difficulty of trying 2 or 3 treatments at once is in the end you're not sure what was helpful to you. And then in the future, if the problem occurs, you don't know the best way to go. So we find that works for a lot of people. We find that people come in actually looking for help with a strong preference for what they want. They have an idea about what they want. And so we tell people to go with their preferences if the treatment's been shown to be effective. And then if it doesn't quite work enough for you, you can decide to add something in or change the treatment later. Another question here, how do you control emotional, angry outbursts when breathing doesn't work? Again, another really good question. Sometimes if people are having emotional, angry outbursts around people, it might be a good time to take a break from the situation, a break from people, accept your anger, allow yourself to be emotional, look for other ways of expressing your emotions. But it's good to be careful in how you deal with that, and deal with it in a planned way when you're involving other people. Another question here, what do you recommend to improve focus and concentration? I suffer from generalized anxiety and panic, and it's one of the worst factors in getting back to work. So it sounds like from that question, trouble in concentration is a factor in getting back to work. Mindfulness actually is a treatment, and there's books and courses on it, and it's included in some therapies. The big focus there is actually on learning to focus your attention. And even what I found in my clinical work, even when someone's been through a really rough time with anxiety or depression, if they practice regularly something like mindfulness or relaxation where it involves concentrating, concentration improves with practice. So when I found people that have trouble reading a book or concentrating on the documentary on television because of anxiety, depression. When they start to practice it, something like mindfulness or some practice that involves concentrating, it does get better with practice. Another question: how do you cope due to circumstances you cannot have a financial cushion at present? So, again, this is a tremendously common situation that people are into a big crunch and they don't have a financial cushion. Happens to many, many people. Sometimes, again, looking around for advice about how to deal with situations, and sometimes when you're in a bad financial spot, it's really important to be able to look at all your options, things like bankruptcy, things like other alternative approaches. And often in these situations, getting advice from someone who's knowledgeable can really help us. I'm often quite surprised by people who are trying to do problem solving but haven't got good advice as a kind of cornerstone of their problem solving.
Just like going to a therapist for anxiety and depression issues, finding a financial expert, like maybe an accountant or financial advisor.
Exactly.
John, can we see the slide that has the books?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Okay.
People
so I was
have
going
a
to tell
chance
people
to write these down because we're going to wind up in just a couple of minutes.
Great. These are two really recent books. They're both published within the last year or two. If you Google the book or go to one of the online booksellers, you'll find them there. If you just put in the first few words of the title.
Well, these are easy to remember. Stress less.
Stress less, live more. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Had one other question come up. Oh, I actually have to pay attention to our time. Do we have time for one more question?
Yeah, real quick, though.
Okay. This one, this is, enjoy webinars, but I'm not really a book person. Will there be more on this website? Actually, there's some podcasts on the website that I think are worth listening to them. I think there's more electronic things available. I think a lot of people are thinking about making this more available to people because everyone isn't a book person. That's a very good question.
And we will have the webinars are being posted on the website as well. John, thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. And I want to thank everybody for attending and participating. We hope it was helpful. You should be getting an email to let you know when you can see a recording of the webinar on our website. And please let friends and family know about our webinar series. The next webinar is scheduled for April 10th, and that's going to be 7 p.m. Eastern. So April 10th, 7 p.m.
Thanks very much, Neil. I really appreciate you. You've been a great host.
Well, thank you so much. And finally, to everybody, consider making a contribution to ADAA so that we can continue these kinds of programs and the many other activities of ADAA, and you can do that on our website. So bye, everybody, for now, and we'll see you next time.